I want to continue discussing what my good friend from Iowa was talking about. There is a reason for the Senate. Now, there are times when it's hard to figure out exactly what that reason is with the lack of activity we've seen the last couple of years, but that has really very little to do with the rules of the Senate. It has a lot to do with the Senate not following its regular order, its regular procedures, and in fact, when we've done that, whether it was the highway bill or the Federal Aviation Act or the Farm Bill, we have always produced a successful piece of legislation. The Senate works when you let the Senate work. The Senate works when people are allowed to bring differing points of view to the Senate floor. And frankly, one of the reasons to be in the Senate is to have the ability to not only bring those ideas to the floor, but to have to vote on those ideas, to let the American people know where we stand, to let the people in the states we represent know where we stand. The idea that the Senate is now afraid of the amendment process is a great obstacle to the Senate getting its work done, but another obstacle is constantly talking about changing the Senate rules. The Senate rules have served the Senate well for a long time and served the country well. The Senate rules are what define the Senate in giving individual senators abilities they wouldn't otherwise have. You know, this is the only body like it in the world where a bare majority can't just do whatever it wants to do. If that's the way we want to govern the country, we have one of those bodies already. It's called the House of Representatives, where the majority absolutely rules, where the Rules Committee has 9 members representing the majority and 4 members representing the minority. I was the whip in the House for a long time, the chief vote counter in the House, and I can just tell you 9 always beats 4. It's not just 2 to 1, it's 2 to 1 plus 1. That's a body where the majority has incredible capacity to do whatever the majority wants to do. That is not the way, Madam President, the Senate's supposed to work. And so we started off this year trying to agree on how to move the Senate forward in an agreeable and effective way. And then we're right back every day now hearing that, well, we're going to have to think about changing the rules. When you think about changing the rules, it usually is not a good indication that you're prepared to really get anything done. The 2 leaders, when we started this year, agreed on a plan to make sure that the Senate wouldn't unilaterally change the rules, that they wouldn't break the rules to change the rules. You know, the first thing you would have to do to change the rules is break the rules, because the rules, once the Senate is constituted, can't be changed by just a majority of senators. It takes more than that. We just created 2 new ways for the majority leader, not the minority leader, but for the majority leader to expedite Senate action. They gave new powers to the leader. One of these rules changes passed 78 to 16. The other one passed 86 to 9. These gave the majority ways to consider nominations and legislation and go to conference. And the minority agreed that under certain circumstances that the ability to engage in debate could and would be limited. But now we're back here again having the same discussion, and the only way the majority leader would be able to get what he apparently wants would be to break the rules. There are enough rules being broken, in my view, in Washington right now. And one of the problems that the country faces right now is, frankly, they don't trust their government. And when you look across the board, from the IRS to what happened in Benghazi to what's the NSA and the answers about retaining records, we don't need to yet do another thing to convince people that there's a reason that they should not believe what people in the government say. Let's just look at a few things that the majority leader said right here on the Senate floor over the last couple of years. In January of 2011, January the 27th to be exact, Mr. Reid said, quote, "I agree that the proper way to change the Senate rules is through the procedures established in those rules." And he went on to say, "I will oppose any effort in this Congress or the next to change the Senate rules other than through the regular order." That was January of 2011. Mr. McConnell, in January of this year, said on the Senate floor, January the 24th, "I would confirm that the majority leader that the Senate would not consider other resolutions relating to any standing order or rules this Congress unless they went through the regular order process." That was Senator McConnell's quote, and in response, Senator Reid said, "That is correct. Any other resolutions related to Senate procedure would be subject to a regular order process, including consideration by the Rules Committee." Now, I'm on the Rules Committee, Madam President, and we're not talking about any rules changes on the Rules Committee, which Senator Reid said in January of this year would have to be part of looking at that. Now, of course, a lot of the discussion is well, the nominations are taking too long. These are important jobs, and there's a reason they take so long, particularly the judicial nominees serve for the rest of their life. They're going to serve well beyond, in most cases, well beyond the president that nominates them, and they have taken a long time for quite a while. I would think that the facts are clear that the Senate is treating President Obama's judicial nominees fairly, and in some ways even better than they treated President Bush's nominees. Already in this Congress, the Senate, in this Congress, the one that began in January, the Senate has approved 22 of the president's lifetime appointments. 22 people on the federal bench for the rest of their life, and that's already happened this year. At a comparable point in President Bush's second term, the Senate had approved only 5 of his judicial nominees. In the last Congress, President Obama had 50% more confirmations than President Bush. 171 of his nominees were confirmed. His predecessor had 119 under similar circumstances, a time when the Senate was also dealing with 2 Supreme Court nominees, who, by the way, also served for life. I think the first term of President Obama, the Senate made the kind of progress you would expect the Senate to make on these important jobs. In fact, President Obama's had more district court confirmations than any president in the previous 8 Congresses. Now, you'd think that would be a pretty good record on the part of the Senate doing its job. You know, the Constitution says that the president nominates, but it says the Senate confirms. And in my view, those are equally important jobs. In fact, you could argue that the last job, the one that actually puts the judge on the bench, is even more important than the first job. Overall, the Senate has confirmed 193 lower court judges under President Obama and defeated only 2. The Washington Post cited the Congressional Review conclusion that from nomination to confirmation, which is the most relevant indicator, President Obama's circuit court nominees were being processed in about 100 days, about 100 days quicker than President Bush's. President Bush's nominees took about a year, 350 days. President Obama's take about 100 days less than that. And then let's look at the other side of nominations. Now, there is a difference in the executive nominations, I believe, because they only are likely to serve during the term of the president and not exceed that. And I think that creates a slightly different standard, but the process on these nominations has been pretty extraordinary in any view. anything, the Obama administration has had more nominations considered quicker than the Bush administration. The Secretary of Energy was recently confirmed 97-0. The Secretary of Interior was confirmed 87-11. The Secretary of the Treasury 71-26. Those are substantial votes done in a substantial time. The Commerce Committee that I'm on just this week voted out 3 nominations the president had made with no dissenting votes to report that nomination to the floor. The director of the Office of Management and Budget was confirmed 96-0. The Secretary of State was confirmed 94-3, only 7 days after the Secretary of State was nominated. Now, members of the Senate knew the Secretary of State pretty well, and it was easy to look at that in a quick way, but it's pretty hard to imagine a Secretary of State that could be confirmed quicker than 7 days after that person was nominated. The administrator for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services was confirmed 91-7. The chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission was confirmed by a voice vote. Yet in spite of all of that, we're being told by the White House and by others that somehow the Senate's record on these nominations is worthy of an unprecedented rules change, and that rules change would shut out the rights of the minority to fully review and debate, particularly lifetime judicial nominations. The very essence of the constitutional obligation the Senate has is to look at these nominations and decide whether these people should go on the court for the rest of the federal bench for the rest of their life or not. I'm hopeful, Madam President, that the majority leader will keep his commitment to the Senate and to the American people and ensure that we move on from this debate that should have happened, it did happen in January, and instead of changing the rules, we do what we're supposed to do and do it in a way that meets our obligations as a Senate and our obligations to the Constitution. Let's not break the rules to change the rules. Let's get on with the important business that's before us rather than going back to the business that we have dealt with months ago. And I would yield the floor.